$1 million question. What is POPI? What is this POPI Act?
Well, Pete, it's the 10 million rand question, but we'll get to that one a bit later. As you know, we live in an information age and data is everywhere.
Yes.
Your personal data is on the internet and it's coasting around. And in the past, a lot of companies would mishandle data. It's often in the news, Facebook and whatnot, with data leaking. What the Protection of Personal Information Act, or POPI, attempts to do is it attempts to encourage organizations that work with data to treat your data as precious goods. Your data is precious to you. And what POPI tries to do is make companies see that it is precious goods and put measures in place to ensure they treat your data with respect and also accountability should they not. It empowers you as an individual to decide what happens with your data and where it goes. And it's got a couple of minimum requirements for organizations in terms of how they can treat your data. So, for example, one of the minimum requirements would be around consent.
Yes.
You have to give an organization consent in order to work with your data, and that is store your data, transmit your data, process your data. Any interaction with your personal data, you have to give them consent. And this is
okay. So that's huge for schools, because schools are
yes.
sitting on a lot of data.
Yes.
Okay, so consent is a big issue with data.
Yeah, schools have a lot of data, and to give you an example where that could be very applicable to schools would be something like WhatsApp.
Yes, we all use it.
Yeah, it's everywhere, and school WhatsApp groups pop up like mushrooms.
Yes.
There's a WhatsApp group for the debate team and a WhatsApp group for a sports team. There's lots of WhatsApp groups. Now, if you click on the WhatsApp group information, you'll notice that you can actually see everybody's information that's on that group.
Yes.
And that's potentially exposing their personal data without their consent.
Oh, wow. Okay, so anything where any information is exposed,
that's it.
This is what POPI is all about.
Yeah, that's exactly that. And technically what a school should be doing is getting the consent of the parents to share their personal data with all the other parents on the WhatsApp group. So the ideal environment would rather be to have a communication platform that doesn't expose personal data, and then the school is not at risk. So consent is one. Another minimum requirement would be access and storage. So, for example, files that are kept in school with personal data, if those hard copy files, not necessarily electronic files, but if those files are stored in a broom closet or in a common area or in a place where anybody can access those files, then again...
Okay, so POPI is not only, I always thought it was digital data, my email address. We're actually saying it's also physical storage of data.
It's any kind of personal data. And I mean, we hear this from time to time from schools where they say, well, I'm already POPI compliant because I don't have a computer connected to a network, connected to the internet. So my data is safe. I'm old fashioned. It's all in a file stored away in a box somewhere. That file with that personal data must comply with POPI as well. So it's written, it's electronic, it's any kind of personal data.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question on what is personal data, but before I do that, I think, is the POPI Act live now? When is it going to be implemented? Before I ask personal, where are we at in the process?
That's a very good question. And the answer is it's not live yet, and we don't know when it would go live. The entirety of the Act isn't live. There are certain parts of that are already in force. All indications are that the Act will be in full force quite soon. The President has to sign it into full force at some stage. Significantly, the parts that are already in force would be, for example, the section detailing the privacy regulator. So there's already an enforcer of the Act that's already on the job.
Okay.
So it's not an Act that might happen. It is an Act that will happen, and it could happen tomorrow. It could happen next month. It could happen quite soon. As I said, all indications are it's going to happen quite soon.
Okay. Okay, we'll get onto some questions because I think for the schools they're going to want to know how to be compliant with it. But before we get there, we're speaking obviously about personal data. And we're speaking about digital, physical. Can you just give us an understanding so the schools can understand within the POPI Act, what is the data, just so they know what needs to essentially be protected?
Okay, personal data is quite broadly defined by the POPI Act. Essentially, it's any kind of data that identifies an individual, that you could connect to an individual. So examples of this would be something like a name, a physical address, whether it's your residence or your workplace, any kind of telephone number, be it a mobile number or a landline number, email addresses, your race, your gender, religion, medical history, criminal records. So anything that can connect to an individual, including things like photos, which again is something that schools need to take into account, since quite often we post photos on social media or on communication platforms without taking into consideration that's personal data. Specifically, I do want to mention that data such as, for example, medical records, as well as the data of children, of minors, are specially protected. They accorded special status in terms of POPI. So for schools...
Okay, so this is big for schools because every school has medical data, race, full information on children.
Exactly.
This is going to be big.
Exactly. So we need to take cognizance of the fact that personal data is in schools and is being processed by schools on a daily basis.
And just to check, so personal data, is it, we've spoken about the learners themselves. Does this also include parents, staff? It's not just learners we're talking about.
No, it's not just any kind of personal data that you have, whether it's on the teaching staff or any staff, personal data for parents of children, and obviously the children themselves. Any form of personal data that you're storing, transmitting, processing, that falls within the ambit of POPI.
Okay, all right. So this is obviously going to be very big for schools, in the fact that schools store a lot of data. Who is POPI actually applicable to? I'm guessing obviously schools, but just confirming that. Who is it applicable to?
The short answer is everyone. Everyone that processes personal data or works with personal data, it's applicable to them. Obviously, in terms of an organizational sense, if you work with a lot of data, it would have a big compliance burden on that organization. So you can think of organizations like banks, insurance company, medical aids. They have a lot of personal data. So their compliance burden is massive. Schools fall in that category. They have a lot of personal data, so they need to ensure that they comply. But even companies that don't necessarily, or organizations that don't deal with a lot of personal data, still have a onus to comply with POPI. They possibly have files or information on their own staff, and that also needs to comply with POPI. So the short answer is everyone. If you work with data, whether you're a school, whether you're a state school, a private school, a primary school or a high school, it doesn't matter. POPI doesn't differentiate. If you work with personal data, you're responsible.
Okay, so obviously schools, this is massive. They're going to need to comply with it. I think then the next question really becomes, whose responsibility is it? You know, within an organization like a school, who actually has to take responsibility for this?
The custodian of POPI, as defined by the Act, is a role called an information officer. And the information officer is a role, it's not a title. So if a school doesn't have an information officer as a title in the school, it is somebody that's assigned the role. So say, for example, usually it's somebody in IT that's assigned the information officer role, but it's not a given. The Act doesn't specify you now have to appoint someone in IT to have an information officer. It could be administrative staff, it could be the principal. But POPI requires, and other acts actually also require, an information officer to be on board at the school to be the custodian. It doesn't make them responsible in terms of policing everyone, but it makes them the custodian to ensure that the processes are embedded.
Okay, so we've obviously got a a lot of schools listening in.
Yeah.
My guess is none of them have anyone with that title.
Yeah.
So do they need to essentially give someone that title?
Yes.
Okay. So tip number one for the schools out there is they're going to need to appoint someone to be the custodian.
Yes, they're going to have to select the lucky winner, and that person will become the custodian of POPI. Now, just out of interest, GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, they also have similar rules to POPI in terms of appointing somebody in a school to take care of GDPR compliance in the school. So it is a necessity.
Okay. Help me with this one. European Union, we're not in Europe. GDPR, we're talking about a custodian in a school. Help me understand how those dots connect.
Yeah, we're not in the European Union, but the General Data Protection regulations also apply in South Africa. It's the way that the GDPR regulations were promulgated in the European Parliament. Essentially, GDPR says that any European citizen, irrespective of their place of residence, is protected by GDPR. So you can view GDPR as different flavors of GDPR and POPI as different flavors of the same data privacy laws. So in effect, if there is a European citizen in a school, say it's a pupil, maybe an exchange student, maybe a migrant, if there's a European citizen on the staff, if there's...
So say I've got one parent.
Just one.
Who has a British passport or
Yes.
a Dutch passport or a German passport.
Yes.
That means the school needs to comply.
With GDPR, yes.
Oh, wow.
So any European citizen, irrespective of their place of residence, the organization must comply with GDPR rules. And I don't want to turn the webinar into a horror show, but GDPR has been in full force and effect since the 25th of May, 2018. So for around about 15 months, GDPR has been actively worked on in the European Union. So that means schools that have exposure to European citizens should be complying right now. Not in a year's time, not in 2 years, right now they should comply. The good news, the really good news.
Good news, okay, we can take that.
We can take that, is that GDPR and POPI are very, very similar. They're not the same. They've got some differences, but they almost copies of each other.
So you're saying that if a school is compliant with one, they're going to be compliant with both?
That's exactly what I'm saying. So if a school has already done their GDPR compliance, they're very well on their way to be POPI compliant as well.
Okay. Big question. I'm not compliant. Does it actually mean anything? And I'm talking to both the GDPR and POPI when it gets enacted.
Well, a law is a law, and POPI is a law like any other. So, Peter, what happens to you when you drive too fast on the highway?
I never drive too fast, but I generally get a little letter in the postbox. My wife gets lots of them, never me.
Oh, I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. Well, that's what happens, and it's the same with POPI and GDPR. So if you are in breach of the law, there are sanctions as defined by POPI and GDPR. And before I get into what those sanctions are, they are scary numbers. But I don't want to create this impression that if there's a fine, that you automatically going to get the maximum fine if you're in breach of the law. Like with any law, like with a traffic fine, if you just over the speed limit, it's smaller. If you race over the speed limit, then you could face a fine and jail time. Now, in terms of POPI, it is the 10 million rand question. In terms of POPI, the maximum fine is 10 million rand.
10 million.
10 million.
Okay, so if a school had to get that fine, it would sink then.
Yeah, that would be for a very severe breach, because remember, that is the maximum. And with that, there is an and/or to the 10 million. It could also be accompanied by a 10-year jail sentence. So there's both a fine as well as jail time. But again, that is for a severe breach.
Do you know offhand jail time? Would that be the appointed information officer, or was it?
POPI is actually quite specific about who's responsible.
Okay.
So it would be the person handling the data that has made a mistake, but the head of an organization is also at risk for facing consequences in terms of POPI. And that's just POPI. GDPR also has sanctions in place. And now we're working in euros. So as we know, the rand hasn't been the euro over the past few weeks. So that's ideally a fine we'd like to dodge. And the fine.
Sorry, I see we've got a question. If you could just say what GDPR stands for again. Thanks for that question.
General data protection regulations.
Okay, and that's a EU law. Just for the question for the person, that law applies here in South Africa.
Yes.
If you have a single parent that is a European citizen.
That's correct. So anybody that's a European citizen is protected by GDPR.
Okay. So sorry, please continue. So
no, that's fine.
The fine in euros?
Yes, the fine's in euros, and it's up to a maximum of 20 million euros.
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
For an entire school district, maybe, but again, not the kind of fine you want to get.
Okay. All right. So obviously, this is big for schools. I think for a lot of schools, it can easily feel like we've got all this information. It's deer in the headlights. What do we do? I think I suppose the 20 million euro question, and thank you for those that are asking questions. We will get to your questions now. Please feel free to pop us some questions. I think my question, where a school is at now, Keith, what can they start doing now to make sure they're compliant with European rules and that they can be ready when the POPI Act comes into South Africa?
Okay, I think the first step is to realize this is happening. A lot of our feedback from workshops we've done as D6 is that clients are unaware, or schools are unaware that this is coming and that it actually affects them. There is a general perception that schools will be exempted or there'll be a lighter touch on schools. So the first thing, I think everybody needs to get their head around that this is definitely happening, and this is definitely happening to schools. Once you've gotten over the shock and the change and the need to comply with legislation, then you need to start doing an audit on what's happening in the school with your data. So what data do you have? Where's the data stored? Who works on the data? What are the systems that you use to store the data on? What are your processes? So kind of step through the process of understanding what POPI or GDPR needs from you. I want to warn against seeing compliance as a checkbox process, as in, I got a system, I got a process. It's more an understanding of what the laws actually want from a school. Once you've gone through that process, I would strongly advise getting some expert help in or getting an expert opinion, because schools have different needs and requirements. Yes. And it's important to speak to somebody that understands schools. At D6, we're probably very well known for the school communicator. Yes. We also have an administration system for the schools to manage that data. Yes. and integration of the communication system for the school. But really, as part of our DNA, it's in our vision. We live it. It is who we are. It's woven into our souls. Is creating effective schools. Yes. And part of that journey is also ensuring that schools are empowered with the correct information in order to comply. So we have a compliance department that conducts regular compliance workshops in terms of complying with national and local education requirements.
Yeah, because that makes sense. I was about to say D6 by its very nature with an admin system and communication needs to be compliant. So you've actually got a compliance department.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just think for our schools out there, we'll get to some questions, but we're literally scratching the surface. There's no ways in 20 to 30 minutes. I think I've got more questions ready. From this, what could be a next step for a school to get more information?
I think they need to keep their eyes out for information sessions in their districts or in their area. D6 is running compliance workshops around POPI in the next few months.
All right.
We've got compliance, POPI compliance workshops in the Gauteng area. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. We've got one scheduled for Cape Town, and we are planning one for the Durban area as well.
Okay, we'll send a link out on that. What is covered in that? What can schools expect within that? How much does it cost?
Well, it'll definitely give them the necessary package of information that they need to start planning towards their own compliance with POPI. And it is a networking opportunity for them to also be exposed to the experts in terms of POPI and the effect on schools. It's around about a 4-hour session that schools will be attending, and it's the cost is around about $475 per attendee.
Okay, and just on that, obviously we've got a variety of people that are viewing and listening. Obviously, none of them are information officers. Yeah. Just for those that missed it, information officer is the person from the who would take responsibility of POPI. You run a further course. Should that be the people who are listening? Is it the principal who should actually attend something like that?
If a school doesn't have an information officer, then definitely the principal. Okay. They should definitely be involved in information sessions around POPI, but the principal and information officer would probably be first prize.
Okay. I think we will take some questions now. So if anyone has questions, but I think Keith, and maybe you can correct me on this, I really do feel like this is a big topic for schools. It's quite a big change for a school to implement. You know, it's not just going to be a quick, I'm just thinking for the average school for consent is quite a big thing. Just to start, I see we had a question earlier, which I'd like to read. It talks about how does this apply when schools, when handling debitors' information for collection. So obviously, parent not paying school fee, there's information there that needs to go to a debt collector. Any idea how POPI applies to this?
Well, ideally, the consent should be derived from an agreement with the parent to pay school fees. So something ideally in writing that says, should you not pay, we reserve the right to pass your details on to a debt collector to collect on our behalf. So in that form, you can get consent. But if that doesn't exist and you just pass the information on, again, that could just fall under the minimum requirement for POPI.
Wow. Okay, that's really big. Question from Paul. What is the Department of Education doing to comply with POPI? Any idea?
No, unfortunately I don't, but I'm sure most departments in government are working hard to ensure they comply with POPI as well, because as I said earlier, POPI applies to all institutions, whether they are publicly held or privately held, or state entities as well. So the Department of Education must comply with POPI at a level as well. If their systems or processes don't, then they're going to have to re-engineer.
Okay. And you don't know offhand if education departments are offering any support to schools in this regard?
They have had some information sessions that I am aware of, and the best would be to engage with the district head in the area and to find out from them if there are any POPI workshops scheduled within the area.
Okay, I think that's a good thing for schools. I also just think, just from chatting, you know, for me, for 470 Rand to be able to do a course with you makes a lot of sense, and we'll put that link out. There's another a question here. Can we use permission from form to cover the child stay? I'm not sure what the context of that one was. Alfonso, if you're still on, if you could just give us a bit more. I don't know if you know what that one means.
No.
Okay. It might be to do, I'm guessing if they have a exchange student, maybe?
Oh, the stay in terms of GDPR?
Yes.
Yes. As I said, as long as consent can be proven that the European citizen has given you consent to work with their data, then it should be compliant. Again, the best would probably be to speak to an expert to just ensure that your processes are aligned.
Okay. And then from Wayne, are you maybe able to assist schools with various templates for parents to sign, for photos to be used on social media, as well as any other relevant templates? I think this is a big thing. I think for schools, part of the system is creating new systems. What would be your recommendation when it comes to templates, forms? Is there anything D6 is working on, or is that something that would be covered in your training course?
Yes, these are things that obviously we can provide as D6 to ensure that there's some kind of a template or some kind of a form that schools could use to get consent in terms of POPI.
Okay. I think one of my kind of thoughts at the moment is obviously we talking to D6 with the school communicator, the admin system. We can clearly see you've put a lot of effort into making sure you are POPI compliant. I know schools will use WhatsApp groups, they'll use social media, just even with Wayne's question about posting information. They'll have MailChimp or newsletter systems. They'll have other admin systems. How, if a school is not using D6 and can't tap into your compliance department, what are the things that they should be checking for with their communication or admin system? Any tips?
Well, first off, I'll do a shameless plug.
Go for it. You are welcome to
contact D6. But secondly, I think it is very, very important for schools to question their providers and their supplier whether they are working towards POPI compliance. As I said, the law can come into effect at any point in time, and if the system you're currently using is not working towards POPI compliance, you might be in a situation where you're going to be forced to change systems at some stage in the near future. So ask the hard questions, ask your suppliers if they are POPI compliant. We find that quite often the questions are pushed by parents, that informed parents are asking the school, this information that you have on me, what are you doing about it? So that's kind of driving schools as well to question their providers. So I would highly recommend that they start the audit process to just confirm their systems and processes.
Okay, I think that's a very valuable tip for the schools out there listening. I think you need to ask those questions. I know D6 has a compliance department, so if they're using D6, they can just call through to your compliance department. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay. If you are not, I think have a check. I think I know a lot of schools are using a combination of different systems. It's definitely worth as a school for you to go look at those, see how the information is stored, what you are doing. If we have any more questions, pop through. If anything comes in after we've closed, we can obviously refer it through to Keith. I think Keith, thank you for your time. I think, as I've mentioned, we're scratching on the surface of a big topic. Any last closing thoughts that you would like to share with the schools when it comes to POPI? And then I'm just going to ask a question if they want to find out more about D6 and you.
Sure. I think the big message that the schools have to take is it's not a big scary monster coming to fetch you and shove you into jail for 10 years.
Okay.
It is rather looking at it as your own personal data and the respect you have for your data to treat others' data the same way. And if you understand that process, then POPI is not a big scary thing, but it is happening. So it's worth having the conversation and starting the process.
Okay. Brilliant. Keith, thank you. Last question then. We don't mind if you do an ashamed punt. If people would like to find out more about what you can do for them in schools, what should they do? Any last thoughts on that?
Surf on over to www.d6.co.za or contact us via email at sales@d6.co.za. We'll be more than happy to help with any queries in terms of communication systems or administration systems.
Okay, awesome. So I've just heard we had one last question, which is scrolled up, which I'm going to ask. I can't see it. Sorry. 1 second. I think we have handled that question. I think we are sorted. Right. Schools, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time logging in. We'll put the information for D6 out if you'd like to follow up. I think for us, our recommendation would definitely, I think for 470 Rand. I also think for a lot of the schools out there, if you're not the principal, I think you need to kind of give this information through to the senior kind of management team. I think it's, as Keith has said, it is something coming. So we would definitely recommend. So Keith, thank you so much. We appreciate D6. D6 is obviously one of our favorite top-rated companies. Got some amazing reviews. If you're not using them, please check them out. And then from SchoolAdvisor side, we hope you found this information valuable. Just a reminder, if you want to check out companies like D6, we'll actually give a link where you can go check them out and see reviews. We're all about kind of introducing you to amazing companies and helping you get quotes from best companies. So I'll shortly put a link there for D6 for their product page. I think we can put through to the school communicator that you can check out. Keith, thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time out. And to the schools, thank you. We also appreciate you taking time out to listen. We hope this has been valuable. If you have any feedback, please drop us a mail, put a comment. And if you have any more topics, please let us know. I think our next topic is in 2 weeks' time, and it is on debt collection. So we can actually ask them some of these POPI related questions as well. If you have any other questions, please let us know. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Keith, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for everybody for listening.